Okay, right. So we actually have people here now. I think we have people a little early. So for everyone out there asking questions and attending, thank you for coming. This is a webinar which is called Walking It Back, which is I have wanted to do from the moment I first heard Alex Capo on Gender a Wider Lens when he was talking to Stella and Sasha about his experience at the Charlton School. And I'm so pleased to have Paul Rossi here from the Terra Firma Teaching Alliance. Just you know, the kind of formal introduction is that Paul's a very experienced teacher, has worked in New York City schools, formed the Terra Firma Teaching Alliance, as I understand it, to help teachers to work together to kind of redirect education back to education. Alex Capo is the head of the Charlton School in Burnt Hills, New York. He's an experienced mental health professional and educator, and I'm just so pleased to have you both here. So thank you very much for coming. So I guess for people who haven't maybe necessarily seen your video, Alex, do you want to just kind of summarize where you're coming from, and then I'll bring you in, Paul, and we can talk about your experience?
Sure. So thanks again for having us. The Charlton School is a small therapeutic learning community or residential treatment center. We're in upstate New York. We're working with a large number of young women ages 12 to 18 that have really struggled with anxiety, depression, self-injurious behaviors, but they really come to our program as a result of inability to get back into their public school, inability to stay in school, or a result of so much missed school because of necessary hospitalizations. And so we have a small number of 28 young women in our residential program who live here, go to school here, engage in home visits and other activities. And then 14 young women who just come for our actual school program, our on-campus day school. And the individual and family therapy is built into that.
Okay, and Paul, you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing in your experience with all this stuff?
Sure. I was a private school teacher for 12 years in New York City at some of the quote-unquote elite private schools in Manhattan, as well as teaching at charter schools in the Bronx and Brooklyn. And as a math teacher, this is not part of my curriculum. So I've had some experiences working at schools that take a very aggressive affirmation approach to gender nonconforming students. I've sort of seen firsthand how that doesn't work, or works incompletely. I would say it's a little more complex, but in the broader culture, some of the messages that these students are getting are dysfunctional, and so I hope to sort of draw on some of that experience and share what I can at the panel today. And thanks for having me.
Great. So one of the things that I am curious about, and maybe you guys could comment on it, is how did we get into this situation? It was kind of like I think Alex and I before it started, we talked about guidance that came down in 2015. You maybe want to talk about about how schools get themselves into this situation, and then maybe we can talk about how we can get them out.
Yeah, and Paul, you probably have a similar, maybe different story, but that for us, that's what happened, at least in this part of New York, was everybody was looking at this 2015 guidance document on treating, students with transgender fairly, equally. But again, it was a guidance document that was really about managing your classroom, making sure that students weren't being bullied or being isolated or being treated unfairly as a result of how they, identified. But I started to kind of notice that as people talked about it, there was a lot of fear associated with it, and it was not guidance, it was law. There was this kind of jump somewhere in there that was very much being interpreted by district leaders as, if we are not doing this, we are going to get our funding cut, and everybody was all in, at that point.
Yeah, for me, I think on a parallel track, it was a lot of these schools are deeply connected to sort of the academic cutting edge of things. I think that's part of their conceit, is that they are smarter than everybody else. And so we were getting this stuff pushed a little bit earlier, maybe. But it wasn't an actual document. It wasn't any official guidance. It was really along the lines of, sensitivity to these issues and the latest thinking on it at the time. And I remember at one faculty professional development, they were talking about moving from the golden rule to the platinum rule. And instead of treating others as you want to be treated, you should treat others the way they want to be treated. That's the platinum rule. And so that sort of shift where the student it's placing the student on a pedestal, they know what's best. And so you are sort of a guide on the side. There's a whole lot of pedagogical, vectors that are informing the diminishment of authority, and sort of looking at the student as kind of a holy oracle, that you're supposed to sort of give them the chance to fully express themselves. And I think that fits in with the approach of, accommodating their view of reality, even though that view isn't necessarily what's best.
So what we've had somebody ask where the guidance came from, and just to say that I know the New York State guidance is very much like guidance you find in other parts of the country. And if you take a chunk of the text and you put it into Google, you will come up with a trans NGO. So it's very much, it's very much activism, I think, that has got into the schools. But just from people who've dealt with this, how did it work out when you tried to implement this guidance?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard, or some of you have heard my podcast and seen I mean, we were all in, and really, because our approach had been always child and family centered, and not in the way I think that Paul is 100% right, but it was more individual, right? It was like, we don't ever use one model here at the Charlton School. That's not how families work. That's not how kids work, right? We really are supposed to be individualizing our approach based on what the student and family are showing up with, at admission, and kind of doing a really thorough assessment and seeing where that goes over time. And then when this kind of gender wave and associated pressure hit, we quickly, without even realizing it, I think we just abandoned, what we had always practiced and what we had known, because it was being served up as, if you're really an individualized program and you say you're doing individualized, treatment on these students and families, how could you possibly not be affirming? How could you possibly not be letting them choose their name and pronouns? I mean, that's really where we got caught, as a school.
And just as speaking as teachers, both of you, what is it like to try and manage when you're having people changing their names and pronouns. I mean, I know I speak to I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and they're like it's so hard to remember, and just as a matter of practicality.
Yeah, I mean, if a school is sophisticated in how they approach this issue, they will give you grace. As a teacher, they will say, it's okay. You're going to forget the first couple of times. It's all right. Like, everyone makes mistakes. And then they give you, an apology script, essentially, that you resolve to do better if the student is clearly, upset by it. And I think that's that's sort of insidious, the more insidious that they do that, because it sort of puts them in the position of giving you forgiveness. And even though it may seem accommodating to the teachers, it's not just, boom, you're fired. It kind of pulls the teacher in and makes you feel a little bit better about it, that you're not going to make mistakes. And so they're able to get a lot more buy-in from the teachers.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. With all of it, I think the short answer for me is it's impossible, to manage. I think that was one of our first real indicators. Is we were really tripping over all of this: name change, pronoun change, different name today, change it on the positive behavior support plan, print the new positive behavior support plan, make sure staff knows that the name changed. And again, to step back from that, and say, we have never let students lead us like that ever in the history of the Charlton School. I mean, in what in any solid clinical or educational program would you ever let a kid walk in the door and say, I don't know if you read my file, but I'm borderline and I better have a treatment plan that supports that, or I'm out of here, and have the professionals say, okay, let's get to work. I mean, we would just never do that. But again, I think that was exactly what we were doing with the gender movement.
One of the things that occurred to me in listening to your Gender Wider Lens podcast and watching the Lisbon talk, Alex, is I was wondering, do you think that it was more obvious to you because of the community because you're in a therapeutic community? Because I mean, one of the things that seems to happen is that when kids go down this rabbit hole, it actually makes their mental health worse, and they deteriorate. But I wondered if you could say a little bit about, like, how long did it take you to figure out that this was not gonna fly?
Yeah, I think it really took us a year, and in some ways, we're very fortunate that, again, when that kind of number went from one student to like 6 students, in some ways overnight, those students, when they graduated the program, all essentially kind of fell apart, emotionally, with the exception of one. And that's really what hit us, over the head. It was like, well, we just spent a year of real solid clinical work in a very intensely structured environment, and we didn't even scratch the surface of what got them here. That was really the wake up for us.
Yeah, for me, one of the things I noticed, and I think some of the counselors at our school noticed as well, was that it deprives a child of the boundaries that they need to sort of trust. Is that if you have this affirmation and whatever you want, and this kind of constant accommodation, it puts a kind of a pressure on them. I think in a different way, than being very hard. It makes them. It basically makes their imagination, this sort of a boundless imagination and a boundless potential to reinvent themselves, and and that the fact that all these adults are bowing down to them. You see this with the critical race theory stuff as well, and that the Black students are really put on a pedestal as the sort of oracles of history from which we are all going to learn. You know, they're deified in a way, and they're given all of this power, and they don't have the maturity to, you know, they shouldn't have the maturity to use it responsibly because they don't know what's best, and they don't know where those boundaries are, and I think they feel very ungrounded. And a lot of times I would notice that their academics would suffer horribly, and their imaginations were sort of set free in a way, which was also championed and acknowledged and celebrated. And these are, you know, these tend to be extremely creative children. And we had some manic episodes with some of our students, where, you know, I really felt like they weren't getting this, they weren't being serviced with boundaries in the way that they needed. And I think it had a real cost for those children.
Yeah. You know, we had a few questions come in before the webinar, and I think one of the most important ones is, how does this fit within the context of what is being described as a mental health epidemic amongst teenagers? I mean, is it? I'd just be interested to hear what you guys have to say on that, and also, you know, specifically from the point of view of what schools that aren't the Charlton school, that have a few individuals and are trying to deal with this, and then they're also being told that they have to tend to the mental health of all the students. You know, what are the implications of that?
Well, you know, for speaking for myself and a lot of my colleagues, we are not mental health. Teachers are not mental health professionals. They should not. Most teachers are not trained to do this. They're being told to make interventions that they have no, you know, no experience with. Now, in some cases, that's good, because sometimes the the certifications are based on bogus things. But you know, this idea, I think it's not only is it asking a lot of teachers, but it's putting them in a position where they could be responsible for doing damage, and they don't know what they're doing. And if they follow what the administration tells them, it could be even worse. So we have, in our teacher network, we have a lot of teachers that are struggling with what the administration wants them to do. In many cases, they're supposed to use one pronoun in the classroom and then another pronoun with the parents. So they're essentially hiding the gender dysphoria from the parent. They're asking them to lie, essentially, and hide this thing for the safety of the child. And so we have a lot of issues around that. And we have some strategies for teachers on how to manage that in subtle ways that won't get them fired. So, you know, it is really, you kind of have to tiptoe in some ways and really play your cards in the right way, while also thinking of the child first, because that's what you're there for.
Yeah, I would agree with, you know, the majority of what you're saying, Paul. I think I don't see a way that this is going to work in schools. You know, I mean, and I mean the actual counseling, the mental health, you know, clinical work that needs to happen. You know, I think schools can do a phenomenal job with cognitive assessments and educating and how to, you know, stack and minimize and come up with, you know, support plans so they can manage behavior, so students can, you know, remain in the class and learn in a way that, you know, information is chunked. But I really think it ends there. You know, we are throwing a lot of money as a state into mental health services for schools that are the same thing that gender affirming care is. It is a boxed model that is going to just get contagious behavior going, because every kid in every school district wants to be a part of something, you know, whether that's what they tell you or not. You know, it feels good to be part of a group. And I think that it's a dangerous road, and we're throwing a lot of money at mental health services in school, and not a big chunk of that has anything to do with a real solid assessment and individualized approach that includes the family before any of this work starts, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about the involvement of the family, because one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is how I think when we were growing up, there wasn't this gap so much between parents and schools, and it was as if we were kind of in it together, and the parents understood to back up the teacher because the teacher probably knew what was going on, and just there was a real sense of kind of working together to educate schools. And then it feels like it kind of developed over time. It kind of went on autopilot. And so it was only with COVID came and people are actually looking and seeing what's happening on the classroom. I mean, I can remember speaking to people and they're saying, I trusted them. I had no idea. So how do you think, do you have any insights into, whether you think that's true, it's just Nancy making it up, or if you do think that's happened, what do you think we could do to get over it?
It's hard. I mean, when parents come to me, I may know a few schools to recommend, but mostly what I say is whatever you can do to homeschool is the best approach, because first of all, you have the institutional money problem. You have incentives aligned to pump money through. There's a whole ecosystem where a lot of people are getting paid from various sources, governments, and and foundations to do things that are more enriching to the to the employee than to the student they're supposed to serve. On the other hand, you have teachers that are coming out of ed schools that are ideologically committed to the gender ideology model, not just as the right thing to do, but as a force for social transformation. These are messianic teachers that come out, especially the younger ones, and they haven't, they see anything contrary to that as, reactionary, and they are using their, I call it ideological grooming. I wouldn't call it, that's where I draw the line, but they really are using the student as a kind of vector to change society rather than what's best for the student. And I see it in every school I've been in. And, every child going through an identity crisis, it was a Chinese saying, every crisis is an opportunity. Every identity crisis is an opportunity to use the child, or to tell the child a story that is going to be politically transformative of society. And these teachers will use that, and they see the child, and then they're doing the Lord's work, in their own mind. And so I think you can have institutions that take a different approach, but unless you have a faculty which is on board with that, and it's very hard to find those people because they tend to be older teachers. A lot of them are leaving the profession. So if you're hiring, you really have to, in the interview process, you have to filter these ideologues out, and you have to make sure that they really are aligned with what you're trying to achieve, because you wind up basically being a brochure where you're saying you're taking a different approach, but if the teachers in the classroom aren't, or they'll see themselves as moles, that they're actually giving lip service to a philosophy, but they're doing completely the opposite in the classroom. So that means you have to have extensive observations in the classroom. That you have to, have professional development that is promoting a different approach. And so that's why it's very hard to start something different, because where do you find the teachers?
Yeah, and I can speak to the family. I think one of the only things I'm proud of, in our first year at taking this on was we never colluded, with the student. I mean, as much as I think we were affirming, we were bringing the parents in. I don't think we were really listening as much as we could have, or we weren't, um, doing enough of our own, research at that time. But we were never keeping parents in the dark. We were never doing anything without parents being at least partly, involved in whatever that next approach was. And I think, again, I will go back to that, 2015 guidance document from New York State Education Department. And I've read it a number of times. You can see where, as Paul's saying, some of these younger teachers, and it's no different for clinical staff, they have been indoctrinated in some ways away from real therapy and holding space and being objective, to working in social justice, where, what the kid wants is what we should be doing. And so I think with that kind of education, if I'm a new teacher, if I'm a new therapist, and I'm looking at that guidance document, it would be very easy for me to see why I could be hurting this kid if I was bringing mom or dad in, because the stories that this kid's told me about mom or dad, he's in trouble when he goes home, and so that is just way too child centered.
So we've got a mixed bag right now. We have true believers amongst the young teachers. We have more experienced teachers who are skeptical but don't feel like they can do anything about it, and we have a lot of very concerned parents. And one of the things that I'm seeing in the chat over here is just people really wondering, how can we approach schools and administrators and make the case for getting this out? People really want to get this out of the schools. So I mean, it would just be interested to see, what you think is a constructive approach that's going to work. Because there seems like there are people on all sides who want to do it, but it's not necessarily becoming anything.
Yeah, I think for me, for the private school world, it is very difficult because there's a board on any private school, and usually that board has different committees, right? So unless you're on the committee which is focused on this particular area, you don't. The way it works is you don't feel like it's your purview to interfere at that level. And then you'll often have the specter of suicide, right? So, the last thing anybody wants is the liability of a suicide, morally, financially. And so that is going to shut down a lot of questions at the board level. And then you have the experts come in and they explain. If you're a group of parents, the thing I would say at a private school, I'd say organize, get together, have meetings, find out who is in your power base, and then try to set up a meeting with the administration, with the principal or the headmaster, where you go together. Very often, what they'll do is the headmaster never wants to meet with a group. They're going to carve you out one by one, and they're going to humor you individually. But you have to basically say, look, you need to listen to us. You need to take us seriously. And the best thing is to get someone on the board if you can. Often these are sinecure positions, or they're prestige positions. So it's, you have to get, somebody who has money, has independent money, who isn't worried about their reputation, which can be the reputation of their business. So it's very difficult because these are 1-year contracts in a private school, and they will, and since the last 3-4 years, parents have become more vocal. They've built in riders to the contracts which say we can terminate your child's, attendance here for any reason. If you talk about us on social media, you're gone. So I'm a big school choice advocate, but there are a lot of gotchas with private schools in that there's no school board, there's no 3 minutes in a microphone. You know, if you don't toe the line, you're out. And you can be blackballed within the cartel of private schools as being a problem parent, what the NIAS, the National Association of Independent Schools, calls the 5%ers, the parents who are really difficult. And so you can shut yourself out of, just like teachers can be canceled if they don't go along with it. Parents can be canceled. Children can be canceled. And so I think the public school system, even though it's got a host of problems, there is more. You can do FOIA requests with a public school. You can, pull emails. You have a certain amount of rights as a parent in a public school that you don't have in a private school. So I think it's more difficult in private schools to make a difference. You have to have a stronger power base. I'd say, 20 or 30 parents. And depending on the size of the school, I'd say maybe 10 to 15% of the parents at the school to make a difference, to have them listen to you, and try to get somebody on the board.
Yeah, and the public school, which I'm more familiar with, I think we've said it in different ways. You got to get to superintendents and some of these change makers, people who actually have influence, and they really, I think they have no idea that there is all this new well done research out there that is really supporting social transition is not simple anymore, and it really should not just be taken lightly. There really should be a lot of thought. I still think there are a very large number of district administrators who have no idea that's even a thing right now. And so getting the right people at the right tables to talk about what is happening in this world, and how now in many ways they're going against guidance. They're going against the research. That's my hope, or that's at least the areas that I'm trying to target.
Well, and I think that's why the Lisbon talk is so great. I mean, it was the first time I heard you speak on Gender Wider Lens, I thought, well, that's a really positive story. But you've actually gone through in detail. And I mean, I don't know if you call it a case study, but it's just very compelling. And so I'm thinking that one place that people could start would be to try and find sympathetic people within their school community and to show them that video, because it seems to me that in talking to teachers, I get the sense that people intuitively understand that the guidance that they have been given is not working, is not making things better. But at the same time, the other thing I notice is that teachers are very protective of the students. And so they don't necessarily want to approach the administration about what's going on with a specific student. They want to be able to say, look, this is a pattern that happens across the board, and that's what's so useful in what you've done. Yeah. So we've got some other. I keep saying we have this scrolling questions, and I'll see a good question, and then it scrolls away. Let's see. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. I mean, what we have states, and New York State may soon be one of them, because Prop 1 passed, where it is illegal not to affirm a student in school, or it would be illegal to not to affirm a student in school, or to out a student to their parents if they're secretly wanting to transition in school. This hasn't become law in New York yet, but in those sorts of awkward situations? Do you have any ideas about ways that we can kind of combat that, just as individuals?
With the outing thing, the restriction on that, one thing that we tell each other as teachers that are faced with this problem, where you're not supposed to tell the parents something, is to just affirm it, at the faculty parent conference, to say, make a point to say, do you know that it is the policy of the school that if a child has gender dysphoria, that I am not allowed to share that information with you if they have other pronouns, and just leave it at that. And this will cause consternation. Like, what do you mean? Is my child like? And just repeat the line. And often the parents will go to the school and say, is this the policy? And often the policy isn't written down because it's a secret policy. They only tell the teachers. But sometimes it can get the conversation going in a way that doesn't implicate the teacher and put them in a position where they could, they could put their job at risk. So you're basically saying, do you know this is what I have to do? That's one approach. The other approach is to meet individually as a teacher, locate the parents. If there is a parent group which is active and you know who they are, try to get them the emails, try to get them, be a bit of a spy, frankly, and give them materials, make sure that they know what's actually being taught in the classrooms, because it's very hard for parents to get that information. So you can become like the man on the inside for some of these parent groups.
It's very cloak and dagger.
Unfortunately, that's where we are.
Yeah. Someone has said public school administrators and superintendents are not taking information for sources like Genspect, which they should. So please share this video if you can. Let's see. Someone is making the point that teachers feel that their jobs are under threat and are afraid to speak up. That's an excellent point, I think.
Something that I've had teachers in our group talk about. Maybe we have to socially, we have to use the pronouns, but if we can stop before the surgery, if we can say, look, if you are, we respect your gender identity, but you are perfect the way you are. You don't have to do the medical thing. Like, if you are a woman, and what is it? Do you need to do these other things? Or if you are a boy, do you need to do this? Because there are lots of different ways to be a boy or a girl. And, this is something you might think about. That can get you in a lot of hot water, but I think some of our teachers have done it, and you have to have a kind of a plausible deniability to not put your job at risk. But you do want to sort of use your influence as an authority in a way that at least can try to put the brakes on some of the most damaging interventions.
I've got a specific question for Alex here, which is they're asking, how were you able to convince whatever board that you report to that not changing any names anymore was, and not using the preferred pronouns? How did you convince them that this was an issue?
Great question. That was about a 2-year process, actually. We had a lot of training. Stella did some of that for us directly. But there was a lot of training. And then again, similar to what worked, I think, with the clinical staff and then the teachers slowly over time, was showing them what had happened with this cohort of students, that we affirmed that left. and then talking to those students' parents directly, getting clips, having parents write emails, really in many ways, exactly what Paul was saying from a school, perspective is you really need a group of people who have lived it to start to get the power of the group to inform, in this case, our board. And interestingly enough, and I can't imagine we're, in isolation, we had several board members who had been struggling with this personally, children, grandchildren, whatever it may be. So there was absolutely a direct, connection to some of this new research and information. And really, like, I think anybody, and that's why I still have hope for the school. I think, like us, anybody who kind of comes out on the other side, and I keep saying, take gender out of it completely. When you just think about what we're doing, if you're half logical person, it just makes sense, and you can look back and say, what we're doing is just so incongruent with anything we've ever done with children and child development in the history of, the world. And I think that's where most people land,
Mm. The other thing I wondered about is autism and comorbidities, because I was speaking to a friend who teaches in the Midwest, and she was saying that what's interesting is that the sort of GSA club has become like the club where all the autistic kids join. And do their thing, and identify as trans. And then she says that the other kids don't really want to be part of that, and they're all non-binary. but it is interesting how there seem to be these comorbidities, but it's like gender becomes the thing that overshadows all of that. I mean, how do you, I don't know that every kid comes with a label, I'm autistic or whatever, but how do you have that conversation with parents and with the administrators? Although I'm not sure what that conversation is, but.
Yeah, to me, it's always about what is the purpose, or what is the focus of this club or group? What's the message, we're promoting? Because as I said before, every kid wants to be part of something, and they'll find people that are, like-minded, like them, and I think, again, gender, at least for the students we worked with, served as such a normal way to join, and be accepted. And for adolescent development, I think it makes perfect sense, because there's such an emotional attraction and almost instant gratification, that comes with being able to wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm cutting my hair, I'm changing my clothes, I got a whole new look, and everybody is going to see, this, and that just, it feels good, right? And I think that's that contagion, I think, that we saw and we keep talking about. And so I think whether it's autism or anything else, they feel like they're part of something. And we have heard from a number of students, who have said, it is so important that you are doing that right at admission. It is so important that before someone even comes into the program, you're being transparent and you're having that conversation, because, like most adolescent behaviors, once you're part of a group, it feels so enormously impossible to get out of it, again. And I think that's where, as Paul was saying earlier, the adults have to be in charge of that, not of micromanaging it all, but just putting some parameters around how we're going to keep them safe, and what is reality, and what is not.
It's one of the things that strikes me about the age in which we're living in is just how adults are intervening into kids' lives, into their cultures. Because for the young people here, they probably won't remember that you had the jocks, and you had the freaks, and you had the kind of people in the middle, and you had these different cliques and youth cultures in high school, and that used to be considered normal. And then somehow the adults have come in and have become involved and begun shaping those cultures. And so I wonder, is there, Alex, when you deal with the students, I think I heard you say something in somewhere about the students experimenting with their identities themselves, but the difference between that and between adults getting involved in validating that.
Yeah, we don't put any parameters on student to student. If they want to use male pronouns with each other, if they want to call each other, whatever name, we don't put a lot of energy into, shutting that down. But the adults are going to interact and approach, students from biological sex, biological name. And again, to your point, right? Probably in our time, it was like, yeah, because that's the equivalent of, everybody called me Capo in high school. Nobody called me Alex. We had nicknames for people. Some were really cruel and some were funny. But it was okay. And on and on. So that's how we're kind of approaching it. At least in that peer culture these days.
Yeah, I think what I've seen from some of the counseling staff is there is a certain unhealthy element that can creep in of, I don't know what you call it, like countertransference or something, where a lot of these teachers and counselors, they have their own issues that they haven't worked out. Like maybe they were bullied in high school themselves, or they weren't popular, and so they tend to have an unhealthy favoritism toward the outcasts, and a contempt for the jockey kids, like the boys, to be frank, who are more physical, can be, they're just a different population. But because it's a very feminized environment, to a large extent, there is this cloying kind of dependency that some of the teachers have toward the student, and there's boundary issues there. And, I think that it's important to really reestablish boundaries between students and teachers. But I think these teachers a lot of times have that going on.
Yeah, I think I've seen that for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say rescuing, but I think is what we have seen that in a lot of different, they connect with their pain, they connect with their struggle, and they want to rescue instead of giving the student the skills they need to be advocates for themselves and, navigate it.
So something that has come up it's interesting in different forms in the questions are, on the one hand, someone says, well, you can counter this stuff by teaching biology properly, which is, I think there's some truth in that. But then there's also, well, what part is the curriculum playing in seeding these ideas and encouraging them? And is there anything we can do about that?
Well, I've seen, the gender unicorn was really big. It's the school I taught at. This division of sex, gender expression. And a lot of times they will acknowledge the biology, but then they won't spend any time. All the interesting stuff is the gender and the gender expression. So, you can teach the biology, but it gets marginalized by all the other stuff that comes in. And, I think growing up, when I grew up, Gen X, it was sort of, a lot of people talk about as a kind of a golden era where you could be any kind of girl you wanted. You could be any kind of boy you wanted, but you were a boy fundamentally. You were fundamentally a girl at the biological level, but the expression of that sex was pretty broad. We weren't stereotyping sexes as much as, say, the 50s or 60s, and I think that was healthy. But then we moved into this place where we're sexing stereotypes. So now the expression of the child is seen as a reflection of some inner being, and it's being reversed. And one tactic that we've come up with as teachers is to use the flawed framework of the gender unicorn and say, look, sex, gender, and gender identity, if you buy into this, well, they're independent of each other. They're orthogonal to each other. And so just because you feel, just because you have a certain gender expression, you prefer certain things or you have preferences, doesn't mean that you are this gender. We have to work within a certain framework so we're not ostracized. But I think there are potentialities within that to sort of cut the causality of where the medicalization of these kids and say, look, it's okay if you like short hair. That doesn't mean you're a boy. Or it's okay if you like boy things, but it doesn't mean you're, a girl things. It doesn't mean you're a girl. And so I think there is an opportunity there for teachers to insert themselves, to try to work against some of the stuff, even within the frameworks that they're being asked to promote.
So just I guess we're down to like our last 10 minutes. And I guess one of the things I wanted to say is, I know, Alex, you've talked about, if school districts wanted to see the video or wanted you to come up and talk to them, that's something that is a potentially a possibility. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know if you want to say more about that, but I thought one of the good things that has come out of this is just the need to play the long game, that it's not necessarily gonna happen overnight. Oh yes, and there's someone saying we have to go to teacher training colleges. I think that's true.
That's
anyway. So I don't know. Do you? We've got, like I said, we've got 10 minutes. Are there any pressing things that you want to get over to people?
Again, I think to just build a little bit on what you just said, I'm happy to talk, as a school administrator who's been on both sides, so whether it's a superintendent's meeting, or I know a lot of districts have their local BOCES, gets together, and that's all superintendents, that meet from time to time. I'm happy to join any of those groups to tell our story. And to field questions and to certainly share, what we've learned, and really getting back to, it doesn't matter how big your school district is, getting back to an individualized approach to students that include family,
I would only add that I think it's really great that there has been scholarship around, how much more complex gender dysphoria is lately. I think, the CAS review and other, if you can get that in front of people in positions of authority, because so often, they're just going on what's the received science, what's the science, right? So there are a lot of opportunities to get those things in front of parents who are questioning this. A lot of times people just need to know that there's an authority, and the prestige institutions have been able to use this to get one over on everybody, and that there are other, established research around this is really healthy, and I think people, if we can use that, it will really help break the ice on some of these things.
Another question that I forgot to ask, I found it now on my piece of paper here, is I'm wondering, because one of the things that seems to come up a lot is the impact of COVID. And I know that certainly in the experience of my school, it impacted it in ways that you wouldn't expect it to. I mean, just like students not being around other students and not having the kind of, pressure to control their behavior, and and just not being as grown up perhaps as they were if they hadn't had their school interrupted in that way. So I'm wondering, what do you think was the impact of COVID? And do you think that things are coming out of it? Are we starting to kind of be kind of through that era? And do you think, have you noticed any changes? Or not?
I mean, I from my perspective, I think that academically it was a disaster. Maybe not a disaster, but a serious blow. And I've had students that came out that it's not only do they not learn the thing they're supposed to learn because Zoom school is a fiasco, but that they forget what they already learned because a lot of the kids are unsupervised, and they're and then there's a social media accelerant where everything is, there is no physical space. They're not learning those rules. I think it's recoverable. Having taught last year, a lot of those kids in 9th grade were going through COVID, 7th, 8th grade. And, I from the other teachers there that saw them, they were starting to come back and starting to learn those things. So I think it is getting a little bit better.
Yeah, I paused because in some ways we had the other side of COVID. We didn't have a lot of interruption. So we really were able to build quality relationships, depth of relationships with families and students, because everybody was all in, right? Everybody was paying attention and intensely, wondering what was going to come next. So I mean, in some ways it was almost the reverse for us. It was actually COVID that opened our eyes and started to get us to hear, these families that we always had contact with, but our connection to family increased dramatically through COVID because we felt very much like, well, we have your child and you're 4.5 hours away. We have a responsibility to over communicate, at this point about what's happening. So I think there was opportunity there, but certainly, everything Paul said was 100%. And I would just echo tenfold the social media impact, for students who didn't have present families and families that weren't working from home and able to supervise and support. There was a lot of adolescents who spent a lot of time becoming gender and everything else experts, online in these chat groups, et cetera.
Well, I'm happy to say that we have a hotbed of organization going on in the chat. So I think it's good. People are finding each other. They're comparing experiences. I'm wondering. I guess. Paul, particularly, I know that some of these parents are teachers too. How can they? Do you have any advice for them? And can you say a little bit more about your organization?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a lot of teachers in schools that are questioning and want to really do more for the child, but are a little bit hamstrung because they don't want to put their job at risk and risk their families, livelihoods. For teachers that have children in the schools, they're sort of a self-contained thing because they're parents and they're teachers, and they in some ways they have even more to lose because they're getting free tuition at the private schools and so on, and they're more embedded in the community. But if I was a parent and I wanted to know more about what was being taught to my child, I would try to locate at the gatherings or places where parents can talk to teachers. Try to locate those teachers that might be able to help, get you information about what actually is being taught there, because I think it's a black hole for a lot of parents. Like, they don't know what's going on. And there are teachers that would be willing to help, but they're not going to make the first move. I would look in the STEM departments because they tend to be more traditional in the STEM departments, or look for older teachers and try to start up a conversation about, oh, what's just curious, what's going on with, does the school teach gender? The phrase gender ideology is a kind of a sub-communicates a gender critical stance. So sometimes you can use that as a kind of code. But it is like spies meeting in the dark garage, frankly. Like our teachers in our network, we want to help parents. We want them to get alternative approaches for the students. But it is a bit of a cat and mouse game. But you might have to make a little bit more of an effort because the teachers probably are not going to be the first to do something.
Well, I mean, I'm a great one for being sneaky and manipulative. So, I mean, I don't mean that sneaky. I mean that in a good way. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the point is not to deceive anybody. The point is to find a way to get involved where you can give another perspective.
You want to make human connections with teachers because teachers are humans, and teachers, have doubts, and I think that by getting to know people and forming a relationship, then you have a basis for something. And that's one of the things that makes me a bit sad is that sometimes we don't go, we just assume that there's nobody sympathetic at the school. And go at it in a very sort of, guns blazing kind of way when, maybe, part of the strategy has to be to find sympathetic people within the school. Because I said this in Lisbon, I really sincerely do not believe the teachers want to be giving mental health advice and making mental health interventions with their students. And, and there's some power in knowing that, you have a group of people who feel the same way and who want to do something positive. So Alex, I'm assuming we've got, if people are interested in inviting you to speak, they can contact us at info@genspect.org, and we can pass on that information to you, and hopefully you can get something going. And the other thing I just want to say before I just let you have a last couple of seconds is that at Genspect we've got a lot going on for parents now. We have letters that you can send that we'll be launching that you can send to your schools to let them know that you're not okay with them affirming your kids. We have a new sort of assessment tool that you can give to your doctors. And then, of course, we have stories and firsthand accounts of people, who have dealt with this and had some success. So I'm going to give you guys the last sort of last word, and then we'll carry on.
Just thank you. It was a great conversation, and every time I feel like I do one of these things, I learn even more. So it was great to be sharing it with you, Paul.
Yeah, likewise, Alex. And thanks for having me. And somebody mentioned in the chat, I noticed, is there a gender critical teachers organization? I would say that all of our members at Terra Firma Teaching Alliance were, most of us fall into that bucket. But we'd be happy to work with Genspect and speak with anyone. My Twitter handle is Paul D. Rossi. And you can look me up, DM me. DMs are open, so shoot me a note. I'm happy to give advice on any situation. We may have a teacher in your area that you can talk to, but probably not at your school because we're still small, but we're scattered around the nation. But happy to work and help any way I can.
So thank you guys, and thank you for everybody who attended. And for the speakers, don't go away because we have to make sure that we capture all of the recordings so that we can have it available for people to look at. And I think there's hope, and I'm so pleased that so many people have come along, and let's spread the word.